The story of the Knights Templar begins not in secret chambers or hidden vaults, but in blood, dust, and fear. In the early 12th century, the roads to Jerusalem were lined with corpses of pilgrims slaughtered by bandits and remnants of war left behind by the First Crusade. It was in this chaos that a small group of armed knights took vows not only of faith, but of violence in service of God. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ, a name that suggested humility. Yet their mission was born from killing. Unlike monks who withdrew from the world, these men rode directly into it, swords blessed by the church and hands hardened by combat. They were granted quarters on the Temple Mount itself, a location so symbolically charged that even medieval chroniclers felt uneasy describing it. From the very beginning, the Templars stood at a strange crossroads between holiness and war, prayer and profit, devotion and domination. What is most unsettling is how quickly they rose. Within a generation, this obscure brotherhood gained papal protection, royal favor, and donations that flowed from every corner of Christendom. Nobles entrusted them with money, secrets, and sons. Kings knelt before them. Such power is rarely given without reason, and even rarer without expectation. Historians still struggle with the speed of their ascent because it suggests preparation rather than accident. This is where the first mystery takes root. Were the Templars simply the right solution to a violent problem, or was their creation answering a need far older and far darker than pilgrim protection? From their first oath, the order carried the sense that something else was already in motion. That question would haunt Europe for centuries, because no one could ever fully explain how innocence transformed into absolute, terrifying authority thereafter. The transformation was so quiet that contemporaries barely noticed it happening, while Europe still imagined the Templars as ragged warrior monks guarding dusty roads. The order was constructing something entirely new beneath the surface of medieval life. Across France, England, Italy, and the Holy Land, Templar houses became nodes in a vast, interconnected system. Money deposited in Paris could be withdrawn in Acre. Messages traveled under the protection of the Red Cross. For the first time in Western history, wealth moved faster than armies. Officially, the Templars owned nothing. Individually, they were forbidden from personal property, bound by vows of poverty that should have kept them dependent and weak. Yet institutionally, they became the bankers of kings. Crowns were stored in their vaults. Ransoms passed through their hands. Wars were financed by signatures written on Templar parchment. This contradiction unsettles historians because it defies the moral logic of the Middle Ages. How did an order sworn to poverty become the safest place on earth to store unimaginable riches? More troubling still was the intelligence network that grew alongside the money. Pilgrims, merchants, knights, and clergy all crossed Templar roads and stayed in Templar houses. Every confession, rumor, and political whisper passed through ears trained to listen. Long before modern espionage, the order understood that information was power, and power was survival. By the late 13th century, the Templars answered to no king and feared no border. Their wealth could destabilize thrones. Their silence could erase debts. Their favor could decide wars without a single sword drawn. To some, they were saviors of Christendom. To others, they had become something far more dangerous, a state without land, an empire without a crown. And this raises an unsettling question historians still cannot resolve. If the Templars were merely servants of the church, why did Europe begin to fear them like rulers? Because no one could explain how monks had become untouchable arbiters of money, movement, and memory, and what unseen price Europe would eventually pay for allowing a hidden network to grow beyond all earthly control without question or resistance from anyone. As the Templars' power grew, so did the whispers. They spread first in monasteries, then in courts, then in places where rumors were traded like currency. People began to say the order guarded more than roads and treasuries. They were said to possess knowledge not meant for common ears, truths uncovered in the Holy Land that challenged the very foundations of Christian belief. Official records remain silent, yet the silence itself feels deliberate. Chroniclers hinted that the Templars' return from Jerusalem changed. Their churches were unlike others, their symbols strangely coded, their rituals spoken of only in fragments. Some claimed they had discovered ancient texts buried beneath the Temple Mount, writings older than the church itself. Others spoke of relics whose existence would have shattered papal authority if revealed. Whether these stories were true mattered less than the fear they inspired. Kings began to treat the order cautiously. Monarchs who trusted no one else trusted the Templars, yet never fully. Why would rulers hardened by war hesitate around men who claimed obedience? The answer may lie in what the Templars never denied. They did not explain their symbols. They did not clarify their private ceremonies. They did not open their archives. Silence became their shield and possibly their weapon. The most unsettling rumors accused the Templars of holding a secret doctrine, one that placed knowledge above obedience and understanding above blind faith. To medieval minds, this was more dangerous than heresy. It suggested independence. It suggested power drawn from something older than Rome. If these whispers were false, they were astonishingly effective. If they were true, they were catastrophic, because history shows that armies can be defeated and wealth can be stolen, but forbidden knowledge creates fear that never fades. By the end of the 13th century, the Templars were no longer feared for their swords alone. They were feared for what they might reveal if ever forced to speak. And that fear would soon demand a violent answer. And so the mystery deepened, unanswered, waiting, watching history move closer toward inevitable catastrophe for everyone. When the Knights Templar first arrived in Jerusalem, they were given a gift no other order could have dreamed of. Their headquarters was established directly on the Temple Mount, within the ruins believed to sit atop the remains of Solomon's temple itself. Officially, this was presented as a practical arrangement. In reality, it placed the order on the most sacred and most contested ground in the medieval world. What followed over the next 9 years is one of the most conspicuous silences in recorded history. Instead of patrolling roads or training openly, the early Templars remained largely out of sight. Contemporary accounts describe them disappearing beneath the Temple Mount for long stretches of time. Tools, laborers, and materials were quietly brought in. Tunnels were carved into ancient stone, yet almost nothing was written about what they were searching for or what they found. For an era obsessed with chronicling miracles and battles, this absence is striking. Later excavations have confirmed that extensive underground passages date back to the Templar period. Chambers were expanded, walls were reinforced, entire sections were reshaped. These were not the actions of men killing time. They suggest purpose, direction, and knowledge of where to dig. Some historians argue the Templars were simply searching for relics to legitimize Christian rule. Others believe they already knew something was hidden there. The most troubling detail is what happens next. After those 9 years, the Templars emerge transformed. Their power accelerates. Their confidence hardens. yet no official church record ever explains what occurred beneath the Temple Mount. It is as if that chapter was deliberately erased, and when history goes silent at the moment answers should appear, it forces one unavoidable question: what discovery was important enough to be hidden from the world, forever? Speculation rushed to fill the void left by missing records. Almost immediately, stories began to circulate about what the Templars had uncovered beneath Jerusalem. At the center of these legends was the Ark of the Covenant, the lost biblical relic said to house divine power itself. While no evidence proves the Ark was found, the persistence of the rumor is telling. Medieval people did not invent such claims lightly. They believed the Ark conferred authority directly from God, bypassing kings and popes alike. Other theories are equally unsettling. Some suggest the Templars uncovered ancient texts describing sacred geometry, knowledge that predated Christianity, and explained the hidden mathematical order of the universe. This could explain why their churches followed strange proportions unseen elsewhere in Europe. More radical claims point to remnants of ancient technology, devices, or mechanisms left behind by civilizations long forgotten, dismissed by later generations as impossible. What binds these theories together is not proof, but consequence. After Jerusalem, the Templars behave like men who know something the rest of the world does not. Their confidence borders on untouchable certainty. They take architectural risks that defy contemporary understanding. They speak through symbols rather than sermons, and they never deny the rumors outright. Skeptics argue these stories were later inventions meant to romanticize the order. Yet, if nothing extraordinary was found, why did the church never clarify the truth? Why did kings tolerate an organization rumored to possess objects that could challenge divine authority? Perhaps because even the possibility was too dangerous to address. If the Templars stumbled upon something meant to stay buried, silence may have been the only containment possible. And silence, once chosen, has a way of breeding fear far more powerful than truth ever could. The years following the Temple Mount excavations mark a visible shift in the order's trajectory. Templar churches began appearing across Europe with designs unlike anything seen before. Rounded naves, precise alignments, and symbolic layouts suggested knowledge of geometry far beyond the era's norms. These were not decorative choices. They followed patterns that modern scholars recognize as mathematically deliberate, raising the question of where that understanding came from. In the same time, wealth poured in at an unprecedented rate. Donations increased, estates multiplied, and financial systems emerged that seemed centuries ahead of their time. Critics insist this was merely the result of trust and efficiency. But trust does not explain innovation. It does not explain how a warrior order suddenly mastered engineering, finance, and logistics simultaneously. Something had altered their foundation. The most disturbing possibility is that the Templars uncovered knowledge capable of reframing history itself. Not heresy, but context. Not rebellion, but understanding. If ancient civilizations possessed advanced science, if sacred stories were symbolic rather than literal, then the authority of medieval institutions rested on fragile ground. Knowledge like that could not be preached. It had to be protected or hidden or both. This idea unsettles historians because it suggests medieval history may have been curated rather than recorded, that certain truths were quietly removed to preserve order. If the Templars became guardians of that knowledge, their fate becomes easier to understand. They were not destroyed for what they did, but for what they knew. And once that knowledge vanished with them, history closed the door, leaving only architecture, rumors, and an uncomfortable question: what else was removed from the past before we were allowed to read it? The power of the Knights Templar reached its most dangerous form when the church placed them beyond the reach of kings. Through a series of papal decrees, the order was granted privileges no group in medieval Europe had ever possessed. They paid no taxes, they answered to no local law, they could cross borders freely, ignore royal courts, and claim sanctuary wherever they stood. Their only authority was the Pope himself, a distant figure whose word outweighed every crown. To rulers struggling to maintain control over fractured kingdoms, this was intolerable. The Templars were an armed force that could not be commanded, punished, or even questioned. A king could outlaw a noble, seize land, or crush a rebellion, but he could do nothing to a Templar knight who refused him entry or denied him funds. This imbalance planted resentment deep within royal courts, where obedience was currency and defiance was treason. Yet the church saw the order as indispensable. The Templars protected pilgrim routes, guarded holy sites, and served as a ready-made army loyal only to Rome. In theory, this arrangement strengthened Christendom. In practice, it created a shadow power operating above the political world. The danger was subtle. The Templars did not need to challenge kings openly. Their mere existence undermined authority. Every exemption reminded rulers that ultimate power lay elsewhere. Over time, reverence turned into fear, because any force that stands above law eventually becomes a question no ruler can ignore. And one day, that question demands an answer written in blood. The contradiction at the heart of the Templars grew impossible to ignore. Individually poor, collectively immense, the order accumulated wealth on a scale that stunned medieval observers. Fortresses rose across Europe, vaults filled with coin, relics, and legal documents. Entire regions trusted the Templars with their financial survival. They became bankers not through ambition but through necessity, offering security in an unstable world. What set them apart was innovation. The Templars introduced letters of credit, allowing travelers to deposit funds in one city and withdraw them thousands of miles away. They standardized accounting, secured loans against land, and financed monarchs too powerful to refuse. This was not accidental competence. It reflected systems refined over decades, perhaps informed by knowledge acquired far from Europe. Historians struggle with the source of this sophistication. Medieval economies were fragmented and slow, yet the Templars operated with efficiency that feels modern. They understood risk, leverage, and trust in ways their contemporaries did not. Some argue experience alone explains this. Others believe their time in the East exposed them to advanced financial traditions preserved from earlier civilizations. Whatever the EE's source, the result was undeniable. Kings owed them money. The church relied on them. Armies moved at their discretion. Wealth granted influence, but influence without accountability breeds suspicion. As treasuries grew, so did the unease. People began asking a question no institution welcomes. If the Templars controlled money, movement, and protection, who truly held power in medieval Europe? Where secrecy and power converge, rumors thrive. By the late 13th century, accusations against the Templars began to circulate with unsettling consistency. They were said to perform strange initiation rites, deny Christ in private, and venerate symbols unknown to the church. These claims emerged quietly, often repeated in whispers rather than proclamations. which made them harder to dismiss. The order's silence only fueled suspicion. Templar rituals were closed. Their symbols were ambiguous. Their churches lacked familiar iconography. To devout observers, this felt wrong. In a world where faith was public and ritual visible, secrecy implied deviation. Even loyal supporters admitted discomfort at how little was known about Templar inner life. Some accusations were clearly fabricated, born from envy or fear. Others remain harder to explain. Confessions extracted later under torture mirrored earlier rumors too closely to be coincidence. Whether truth or invention, the consistency suggests a narrative already existed before arrests ever began. Rumors do not destroy powerful institutions alone. They prepare the ground, they normalize suspicion, they transform fear into justification. By the time kings and clerics spoke openly against the Templars, many were ready to believe the worst. Because if an order possessed wealth, knowledge, and independence beyond control, it was easier to imagine darkness at its core. And once that belief took hold, destruction became not only possible, but righteous in the eyes of those who feared them most. By the dawn of the 14th century, France was a kingdom bleeding money. Endless wars, extravagant courts, and political ambition had pushed King Philip IV to the edge of financial collapse. His treasury was empty, his nobles restless, and his authority fragile. In this desperation, one creditor loomed larger than all others: the Knights Templar, and they held royal deposits, financed military campaigns, and safeguarded the crown's most sensitive assets. The King of France was, in effect, indebted to an order he could neither command nor control. This imbalance gnawed at Philip. Every unpaid loan was a reminder of weakness. Every Templar exemption from taxation was a public humiliation. Attempts to tax the clergy had already sparked conflict with Rome, and Philip had learned a dangerous lesson. When power is blocked by law, it must find another route. The Templars were not merely wealthy, they were untouchable, and that made them intolerable. Evidence suggests the king's hostility did not emerge suddenly. Years before the arrests, Philip had tested accusations, gathered testimony, and quietly pressured church officials. He positioned allies, secured silence, and waited. The narrative of heresy was not invented overnight, it was cultivated. Debt alone does not explain the coming purge, but it clarifies motive. Destroying the Templars would erase what Philip owed, seize their assets, and remove a rival power center in one stroke. This raises a chilling possibility. If the order's fall solved so many problems at once, was justice ever the goal? Or was the accusation merely the final step in a plan conceived long before the first chains were locked? The order went out in secret, sealed, and sworn to silence. Across France, royal officials received instructions not to be opened until a specific date. At dawn on Friday, October 13th, 1307, those seals were broken. Within hours, Templars were arrested simultaneously in cities, villages, and fortresses. No warnings leaked, no resistance formed. The precision was terrifying. Men who had survived crusades were dragged from their beds by local authorities who suddenly possessed detailed knowledge of Templar operations. Records were seized, treasuries locked, leaders isolated. This was not a spontaneous act of justice. It was a military-style operation executed with ruthless efficiency. Such coordination required months of planning, accurate intelligence, and intimate familiarity with the order's structure. Someone had been watching closely. The shock was total. Europe awoke to an unthinkable reality. The most powerful knights in Christendom were branded criminals overnight. Charges ranged from blasphemy to idol worship, from heresy to moral corruption. Many were stunned into silence. Others protested their innocence. None were prepared. The choice of date would echo through history. Friday the 13th became a symbol of betrayal, not superstition. It marked the moment secrecy turned fatal. The Templars' greatest strength, their silence, now worked against them. And as the arrests spread, one truth became unavoidable. This was not the act of a fearful king reacting in panic. It was the execution of a plan already perfected. Once imprisoned, the Templars faced a system designed not to uncover truth, but to manufacture it. Interrogations began almost immediately. Torture was authorized, justified as a means of saving souls rather than breaking bodies. Under unimaginable pain, men confessed to crimes they could barely comprehend. Denials turned into admissions. Silence turned into screams. What is most disturbing is the consistency of the confessions. Many described similar rituals, similar denials, similar acts. Skeptics argue this proves guilt. Others point to a darker explanation. Interrogators often shared expectations. Under torture, the human mind clings to patterns offered as escape. Say the words, admit the sin, end the suffering. The charges themselves were strange. Kissing idols, spitting on the cross, worshiping a mysterious head. These accusations reflected older fears, not evidence. They echoed rumors whispered for decades. It was as if the outcome had been written before questioning began. Official records preserve the confessions, but omit the screams. They list crimes, but erase context. What they never answer is the most important question. If the Templars truly held dangerous knowledge, was torture used to expose it or to ensure it died with them? Because fire destroys more than bodies. It erases stories. And whatever truth lay beneath those confessions vanished in the smoke, leaving history with answers that feel rehearsed, incomplete, and permanently stained by the certainty that something far more threatening than heresy was being buried alive. In the months leading up to the arrests of 1307, something strange was happening on the Atlantic coast of France. At the port of La Rochelle, one of the Knights Templars' most important strongholds, ships quietly came down and went under the cover of routine commerce. La Rochelle was not just a harbor, it was the Order's primary naval base, a gateway to routes stretching across Europe, the Mediterranean, and beyond. And then, without explanation, the fleet vanished. When royal agents arrived to seize Templar assets, they found docks empty. No warships, no cargo vessels, no records explaining their departure. For a maritime power so carefully documented elsewhere, this absence is staggering. Ships do not simply disappear, especially not entire fleets. Yet no contemporary chronicler recorded a battle, a storm, or an official mission that could explain their loss. The timing is what unsettles historians most. The disappearance occurred just days, possibly hours before the mass arrests. This suggests foreknowledge. Someone within the order knew what was coming. Orders were given, crews assembled, sails were raised in silence. La Rochelle's empty harbor became a question no authority ever answered. Where did the ships go? Who commanded them? And why did no king, pope, or admiral ever successfully track their route? The night those ships vanished marked the moment the Templars stopped reacting to history and began shaping their final escape from it. Along with the ships went something even more troubling: the Templars' wealth. When royal officials seized commanderies across France, they expected to uncover mountains of gold, relics, and documents. Instead, they found accounts that did not add up. Vaults were lighter than expected. Inventories felt incomplete. Something essential was missing. For centuries, legends have tried to fill this gap. Some speak of chests filled with gold and silver, enough to bankrupt kingdoms if recovered. Others believe the true treasure was not monetary at all, but symbolic. Sacred relics, ancient texts, and sealed archives that recorded discoveries, never meant to be read aloud. Objects that could challenge authority are more dangerous than armies. What gives these stories weight is the lack of contradiction. The French crown never displayed vast Templar riches. Rome never reclaimed lost relics. No rival power ever boasted of seizing the order's greatest assets. The treasure simply vanished, as if it had been deliberately removed from the world. Skeptics argue the wealth was exaggerated, yet exaggeration does not explain the silence. If the treasure never existed, there would have been relief, clarification, closure. Instead, there is only absence. A financial empire collapsed without leaving financial remains. That is not failure, that is extraction. The unanswered question lingers like a shadow. What was important enough to move in secret under threat of annihilation across open seas with no record left behind? Whatever was smuggled away was considered more valuable than the order's own survival. Taken together, the empty harbors, missing treasure, and sudden coordination point toward a single unsettling conclusion. The arrests of 1307 did not catch the Templars unprepared. They were late. Evidence suggests the order had already shifted into motion, executing a plan conceived long before Philip's final strike. The Templars were masters of logistics. They understood timing, routes, and secrecy. If they believed destruction was inevitable, they would not have waited helplessly. Instead, they would have ensured that what mattered most survived. This reframes the purge, not as a sudden collapse, but as the final act of a longer story. Some theories suggest the fleet sailed to Scotland, others to Portugal, and more radical claims point toward the New World. None can be proven, yet all share a common assumption. The destination mattered less than the preservation of something entrusted to the order generations earlier. If the Templars' final mission was to protect knowledge, relics, or truth beyond political reach, then their apparent defeat becomes something else entirely, a sacrifice, a diversion. While Europe watched knights burn, something else slipped quietly into history's blind spot. And this possibility changes everything, because if the order succeeded in its final mission, then the greatest secret of the Knights Templar was never lost. It was simply removed from view, waiting somewhere beyond the reach of kings, popes, and the official story we were taught to trust. Jacques de Molay was not a revolutionary nor a reckless mystic. He was an administrator, a soldier, and a believer in the system he served. By the time he became Grand Master of the Knights Templar, the order was already under strain, yet he never imagined its destruction would come from within Christendom itself. Arrested in 1307, de Molay was dragged from a life of authority into years of isolation, interrogation, and calculated humiliation. Imprisoned in cold stone cells, he endured repeated questioning designed to extract not truth, but compliance. Like many others, he briefly confessed under torture, only to later retract every word. This retraction sealed his fate. The church could forgive weakness under pain, but it could not tolerate defiance after submission. From that moment, de Molay was marked. What stands out is what he never did. He never attempted to bargain. He never offered secrets in exchange for mercy. Even when faced with execution, he chose silence. For a man accused of heresy, this refusal is astonishing. Death was certain. Each could have delayed it, softened it, perhaps even prevented it. Yet de Molay said nothing of value to his captors. Historians struggle with this choice. Was it loyalty, faith, or fear of consequences beyond death? Whatever the reason, his silence suggests knowledge that could not be surrendered. As flames approached, Jacques de Molay protected something unseen, choosing annihilation over revelation. On March 18th, 1314, Jacques de Molay was led to a small island in the Seine. Crowds gathered, expecting a confession, a final submission that would justify years of persecution. Instead, they witnessed something far more unsettling. Bound to the stake, de Molay proclaimed his innocence and condemned those who had betrayed justice. Then, according to chroniclers, he issued a curse. He called upon God to judge his enemies and summoned both Pope Clement XIII and King Philip IV to meet him before the divine court within a year. Such declarations were not uncommon in medieval executions, yet what followed was extraordinary. Within weeks, the Pope was dead. Within months, the king died suddenly, his health collapsing without warning. By the end of the year, the Capetian dynasty itself began to unravel. Historians debate the accuracy of the curse's wording, but not the timing of the deaths. Coincidence is the rational explanation, yet the pattern unsettles even skeptics. Medieval Europe believed deeply in divine justice, and to many these events confirmed that something had gone terribly wrong. The curse transformed de Molay from condemned heretic into prophetic figure. His execution no longer felt like closure, but ignition. Fear replaced triumph. The destruction of the Templars now carried consequences no one had anticipated. Whether divine or psychological, the impact was real. Power had answered violence with silence, and silence had answered back. After the ashes settled, one question refused to disappear. What did Jacques de Molay know? As Grand Master, he would have been privy to everything the order protected: its finances, its roots, its alliances, and its secrets. If the Templars possessed forbidden knowledge, relics, or truths uncovered in Jerusalem, they would have passed through him. Yet no record shows de Molay revealing anything of substance. No documents surfaced. No confessions explained the order's inner workings. This absence is louder than any accusation. If nothing existed, torture would have produced trivial details. Instead, interrogators complained of evasions and denials. Silence persisted to the end. Some believed the knowledge was already gone, sent away with the fleet, leaving de Molay nothing left to surrender. Others argue the knowledge was never written, passed orally to prevent capture. Either way, its disappearance appears intentional. The most chilling possibility is that de Molay understood something about power itself, that revealing certain truths would destabilize faith, authority, and order beyond repair. Knowledge like that cannot be undone once spoken. By taking it to the grave, he ensured it remained myth rather than weapon, and that choice forces an uncomfortable thought. Perhaps the greatest secret of the Knights Templar was not lost through violence, but preserved through silence. As the fires of persecution spread across Europe, one land remained beyond the Pope's reach: Scotland. At the time of the Templar Purge, Scotland was excommunicated, its king at war with England and its church effectively cut off from Rome. Papal decrees carried little weight there. For men fleeing annihilation, this made Scotland something rare in medieval Europe. A blind spot, legends claim Templars arrived quietly on Scottish shores, stripped of insignia, but not of purpose. They blended into remote communities, offered military expertise, and found protection among clans hostile to outside authority. Unlike France, Scotland had no incentive to enforce Rome's will. No mass arrests followed. no trials, no executions. Silence once again took hold. Supporters of this theory point to places like Rosslyn Chapel, built decades later with symbolism that defies conventional explanation. While evidence remains circumstantial, persistence of the narrative is telling. People sensed continuity. They believed the order survived not through confrontation, but concealment. If the Templars sought refuge anywhere, Scotland offered what no other land could: distance from Rome, loyalty to secrecy, and a landscape where memory could be buried without records. Survival, in this case, did not require victory, only disappearance. Centuries later, another brotherhood emerged, wrapped in symbolism, secrecy, and ritual. Freemasonry claimed ancient origins, spoke in allegory, and guarded its inner knowledge through initiation. Almost immediately, comparisons to the Templars followed. Similar symbols appeared. Shared architectural obsessions surfaced. The language of builders echoed that of warrior monks. Skeptics dismiss these links as coincidence or romantic invention. Yet the parallels remain difficult to ignore. Both orders valued geometry as sacred language. Both structured themselves hierarchically. Both believed truth was revealed gradually, not imposed. Most strikingly, both operated quietly within society rather than against it. Some theories suggest surviving Templars reshaped themselves into a non-military order, trading swords for symbols. If open power had led to destruction, subtle influence offered survival. Knowledge could be preserved without provoking authority. There is no document proving direct succession. There never would be. That would defeat the purpose. What survives instead are echoes, rituals without explanation, symbols older than their supposed origins, traditions that insist they are older than history allows. If the Templars became Freemasons, it was not rebirth, it was adaptation. The order did not vanish, it learned how to remain invisible. The most unsettling theory is not that the Templars survived, but that they succeeded, that their final mission was not escape, but transformation. By dissolving their visible structure, they removed the target by embedding themselves within culture, architecture, and institutions. They achieved permanence. Influence does not require command, it requires patience. Ideas outlive armies. Symbols outlast kings. If the Templars safeguarded knowledge too dangerous to reveal openly, dispersing it may have been the safest choice, not as doctrine, but as inheritance. Modern institutions still display symbols with unclear origins. Buildings align with ancient geometry. Ceremonies repeat actions whose meanings are forgotten but preserved. This does not prove conspiracy, it suggests continuity. History prefers clean endings. The Templars never received one, no recovered treasure, no final confession, no revealed truth, only fragments that refuse to fade. And that is what makes the idea so disturbing. If the Templars are gone, their shadow remains. And if they are still influencing the world, they are doing so exactly as they learned long ago, quietly, patiently, in plain sight, waiting for those who know how to look. Among the strangest artifacts linked to the Knights Templar are maps that appear to know too much. Medieval charts attributed to later centuries depict coastlines with unsettling accuracy, showing land masses that official history claims were unknown at the time. These maps are not crude guesses. They reflect precise proportions, recognizable outlines, and navigational confidence that should not have existed in the Middle Ages. Some scholars argue these maps were copied from older sources, inherited fragments of forgotten knowledge passed down through cultures long vanished. Others believe they represent first-hand exploration, voyages conducted quietly, without royal banners or recorded triumphs. The Templars, with their fleets, resources, and secrecy, fit uncomfortably well into this possibility. What makes these maps disturbing is not merely what they show, but what they omit. There are no names of explorers, no dates of discovery, no claims of conquest. The information exists without attribution, as if intentionally detached from identity. Knowledge without credit is harder to trace and easier to protect. Critics insist coincidence and exaggeration explain everything. Yet coincidence fails to explain why such maps repeatedly appear linked to circles associated with secrecy and religious authority. If the Templars possessed access to ancient geographic knowledge or traveled farther than history admits, it would explain why their fleet vanished without a trace. Maps are not just tools, they are declarations of understanding. And these maps suggest someone, somewhere, knew the world far better than they were allowed to say aloud. Walk into a Templar church and something feels different. The proportions are deliberate, the angles precise. These buildings do not merely shelter worship, they communicate something silently. Scholars studying their layouts have identified mathematical ratios and geometric principles that appear centuries ahead of their time. Patterns based on harmonic balance, astronomical alignment, and symbolic symmetry recur again and again. This knowledge should not have been accessible to medieval builders, yet the Templars applied it consistently across Europe. This suggests centralized instruction, not local experimentation. Geometry was not decoration, it was language, a way of encoding meaning into stone. Some researchers believe this knowledge came from contact with Islamic scholars during the Crusades, where ancient Greek and Roman science had been preserved. Others argue it goes deeper, pointing toward lost traditions inherited from civilizations erased by time. Either explanation challenges the narrative of medieval ignorance. Sacred geometry implies a worldview where mathematics reveals divine order, not just structural stability. If the Templars embraced this belief, it would place understanding above obedience, insight above ritual. That alone would have been enough to alarm church authorities. When architecture becomes scripture, control shifts. Knowledge stops flowing from pulpit to people and begins rising from stone itself. That kind of silent authority is impossible to police. The destruction of the Knights Templar has long been framed as a response to heresy, corruption, or political conflict. But what if these explanations miss the deeper threat? What if the real danger was not belief, but understanding? Institutions survive by controlling narratives. They fracture when those narratives are questioned by knowledge that cannot be contained. If the Templars possessed ancient texts, scientific insights, or alternative interpretations of sacred history, their existence alone would destabilize authority, not through rebellion, but through comparison. Truth does not need to shout, it only needs to exist. Heresy can be recanted, wealth can be seized, armies can be crushed, but knowledge, once spread, cannot be unlearned. Perhaps this is why the order was erased so thoroughly, why records vanished, why silence followed fire. The goal may never have been confession, it may have been erasure. Seen through this lens, the Templars were not punished for what they believed, but for what they knew. Knowledge that contradicted official history. Knowledge that empowered individuals to think rather than submit. If that is true, then their destruction becomes a warning rather than a tragedy, a message written into history itself. Some truths are tolerated, others are buried so deeply that only fragments remain. And those fragments still disturb us because they hint at a past where understanding once threatened power enough to justify annihilation. The most enduring theory surrounding the Templars' final mission centers on a single dangerous idea: that the order was guarding an object whose existence alone could destabilize religious authority. Legends point again and again to relics of immense symbolic power: the Ark of the Covenant, sacred vessels, objects said to represent a direct connection between humanity and the divine, bypassing institutions entirely. Such relics were not merely spiritual artifacts in the medieval mind, they were political weapons. Whoever possessed them could claim legitimacy not granted by kings or popes, but by God Himself. This is why relics were fought over, hidden, and sometimes destroyed. Control over faith meant control over people. The Templars, stationed at the heart of ancient Jerusalem, had access no other Christian order possessed. If they uncovered or inherited such an object, secrecy would have been essential. Revealing it would invite chaos, war, and immediate annihilation. Protecting it would require sacrifice. Some believe the relic was moved with the fleet, sent beyond Europe's reach. Others argue it was concealed closer to home, hidden in plain sight within structures designed to encode meaning rather than display it. The truth may never be known. What matters is motive. If the Templars believed they were guardians rather than owners, their actions make sense. Their silence, their refusal to bargain, their willingness to die. They were not protecting themselves. They were protecting something they believed the world was not ready to wield. Another theory suggests the final mission had nothing to do with objects, but with ideas. Knowledge can be more destabilizing than relics, especially when it contradicts accepted doctrine. If the Templars uncovered documents that challenged the origins of the Church, the nature of Christ, or the timeline of sacred history, their destruction becomes easier to understand. Written truth can be copied, smuggled, and preserved long after institutions collapse. Hiding such documents would require foresight and coordination. They could not be left in one place. They would need to be dispersed, encoded, or entrusted to future generations who might understand their significance. Supporters of this theory point to recurring symbols, architectural codes, and allegorical teachings that appear designed to transmit ideas without exposing them directly. Knowledge disguised as tradition, truth hidden behind ritual. The Church could tolerate wealth, even military independence, but it could not tolerate competition over narrative authority. Doctrine survives by certainty. Documents that introduce doubt undermine everything. If the Templars' final mission was to preserve forbidden truth, then their destruction was not the end of the story. It was containment. Fire was used not to cleanse belief, but to prevent dissemination. And if fragments survived, history itself may still carry echoes of truths never meant to resurface openly. The most haunting theory is also the simplest. The Templars knew they would not survive. They saw the tide turning, understood the inevitability of their destruction, and acted accordingly. Their final mission was not escape, but endurance through sacrifice. By allowing themselves to be crushed publicly, they redirected attention. While trials, confessions, and executions consumed Europe, something else moved quietly beyond reach. This would not have been improvisation. It would have been planning refined over decades of secrecy. Sacrifice has power, It creates myth, it erases trails, it convinces enemies they have won completely. If the Templars intended something to survive, ensuring their own extinction may have been necessary, this reframes their silence and discipline as strategic, not passive. They did not resist because resistance would expose what mattered most. They did not confess because confession would unravel the future. If this theory is true, then the Templars achieved what few orders ever have. They outlived themselves. Their mission continued without them, embedded in symbols, knowledge, and unanswered questions. And that possibility lingers uncomfortably because if their plan succeeded, then history's greatest secret was never lost. It was simply carried forward beyond the reach of power, waiting patiently for a time when understanding would be safer than belief. The destruction of the Knights Templar is often remembered as a brutal injustice, but it may also represent something far more calculated. When examined closely, their fall bears the hallmarks of an extraordinary historical erasure. Records vanished, testimonies conflicted, assets dissolved without trace. Within a single generation, one of the most powerful institutions in Europe was reduced to fragments and rumor. Unlike other fallen orders, the Templars left no clear ending. There was no recovered treasure to catalog, no surviving archive to study, no definitive confession to explain their actions. What remained was silence enforced through fear and repetition. Official histories hardened quickly, presenting a simplified narrative that discouraged further inquiry. This is what makes the cover-up so effective. It did not rely on secrecy alone, but on exhaustion. Centuries passed without answers, and uncertainty became normal. Over time, questions were dismissed as legend. Doubt was reframed as fantasy. Curiosity became embarrassment. True erasure does not remove evidence, it buries meaning. The Templar story survived only as accusation and myth, stripped of context and intention. That may have been the point. Because a mystery unresolved is easier to control than a truth exposed. And in that sense, the disappearance of the Knights Templar stands as one of history's most complete and enduring acts of deliberate forgetting. Despite their apparent annihilation, the Knights Templar never fully left the world they shaped. Their echoes persist in ways that are subtle, symbolic, and difficult to trace. Modern institutions still reflect structures first refined by the order, banking systems built on trust rather than proximity, networks that function across borders, symbols whose meanings are assumed but rarely questioned. Secret societies, fraternal orders, and private institutions have long drawn inspiration from the Templar mythos. Whether through ritual, architecture, or allegory, the image of hidden knowledge guarded by initiates endures. This does not prove survival, it proves influence. Ideas once introduced do not require their creators to remain alive. Even popular culture returns endlessly to the Templars, not because answers have been found, but because something feels unfinished. Stories persist where closure never came. Symbols repeat where explanations failed. The most unsettling thought is that influence does not require coordination, it requires inheritance. If knowledge was fragmented and passed forward subtly, it would surface not as doctrine, but as instinct, patterns without memory, meaning without source. In this way, the Templars may have achieved something rare. They became invisible without becoming irrelevant. Their presence lingers not as authority, but as suggestion, shaping the world quietly without ever needing to announce themselves again. After centuries of speculation, theory, and dismissal, one question still refuses to disappear. If the Knights Templar truly failed, why was their final mission never found? Empires fall, treasures are seized, and secrets eventually surface. Yet in this case, nothing definitive ever emerged. No relic reshaped history, no document rewrote doctrine, no confession explained the silence. The absence itself became the mystery. This forces an uncomfortable possibility. Failure usually leaves debris, victory leaves artifacts, but intentional concealment leaves nothing at all. If the Templars succeeded in hiding whatever they deemed most dangerous, then history has been shaped by something it cannot see. Perhaps the final mission was never meant to be discovered. Perhaps it was designed to vanish completely, leaving only doubt behind. That doubt is powerful. It keeps the story alive. It invites questions no authority can fully silence, and it ensures that the Knights Templar remain unfinished business in the human story, because if they truly failed, the world would have answers. And the fact that we still search suggests that somewhere beyond records and ruins, their final mission may have worked exactly as intended.